Hello everyone, we are here for the first Kubera video of 2025, picking up with the spin-offs, of course, starting, well, I'm finishing today with In My Delusion, regardless of how long it is. I think this is the one that was 3 chapters long, so we've got some nice stuff to get into. I hope you all had a wonderful Christmas period, and I hope this new year treats you very, very well. Treated me quite nicely. That's on my chair because it's really fucking low down. Look at that. I look shitloads taller. Christ alive. Anyway. Kubera time. Kubera time. I was tempted to stream this. I'm recording this on Thursday the 2nd. It's going up on Friday the 3rd. But I decided not to. Because I've got a very light week next week. So keep your eyes peeled. Is all I'll say. These. Keep them looking at your screen. And follow me on Twitter, because I'll announce stuff over there, if it's relevant. So, I'm just saying, look in the description. Anyway, we've been waffling for a minute. Let's just start reading. At the beginning of time, a giant snake was encompassing the universe. And he had a companion. Manasa was her name. She was someone who understood, cared about, and loved the giant snake more than anyone else. Sharing laughter and shedding tears together until the end of one universe. His first and last beloved companion. Obviously, Big Snake is Ananta. Season 3, Spin-off 18, In My Delusion, Volume 1. Unlike the giant snake that was too innocent and didn't even know how to manage his power, his companion was very knowledgeable, and had already mastered the skill that the giant snake had to learn. As if she was born to be the mentor of this giant snake, but didn't know any better. She taught him many things, slowly and one by one. Yeah, you might as well, you got to the end of time. And all the while, she'd emphasized the importance of wielding his mighty power righteously. Not only that, but she'd also inspire him by always living up to her own teachings, and seeing her lead by example. He'd learned from early on how to be considerate of weak ones and stand by goodness. Many acts of massacre or war was suppressed even before they were initiated, and with the top 2 powerful ones in the universe. God, that's an awkward sentence. With the 2 most powerful ones in the universe volunteering to be the peacekeepers, other strong ones had no choice but to follow in their footsteps. Of course, they were faced with countless ordeals throughout their long journey, but in every such instance, Manasa would clearly overcome all obstacles. With her wisdom and brilliant ideas, the giant snake, applauding with ever-growing admiration toward his mate, but reassured in his belief that as long as it was her, the world's peacefulness would last forevermore. Then one day, entities referring to themselves as primeval gods showed up after disappearing and leaving the universe under Manasa's care for so long. And Manasa seemed to be bumping heads with them to a minor extent. Minor. When the snake expressed concern, she smiled at him as if to tell him it wasn't a big deal. But having spent so much time with her, you could tell just by looking at her smile that things were far from okay. Soon after, while she'd stepped away, one of the primeval gods came to the giant snake. Didn't your partner ever teach you about time? According to this primeval god, everything that seemed to have miraculously gotten resolved through Manasa's sheer wisdom until now was in fact thanks to her ability to travel through time. And because that ability renders damage to the user every time it's used, Manasa must have had to endure substantial sacrifice without anyone knowing. As the giant snake was struck with panic, the primeval god proposed, "You can also wield that same power. Wouldn't it be better for you to use it instead of Manasa, so she no longer needs to sacrifice? That's sus. Mysterious hooded god. That's strange that you're pushing such a thing onto Ananta. Peculiar. This is going to have set a bunch of things in motion. This one small thing here. Small. This one little interaction here has effectively set almost the entire story in motion. The giant snake agreed to this without a second thought. And the primeval god, grinning in satisfaction, taught him the power of time. I need to read this. Anyway, sorry. Minor distraction. But it was kind of important, so bear with me. It's the start of a new year. Stuff going on. Manasa got furious with the giant snake when he told her this upon her return. Don't you ever wield that power. Don't you even listen to that bastard. The giant snake told her that he'd learned it out of concern for her. But when she asked him, would you trust me, or would you rather trust that jerk? He couldn't find any words to counter-argue. So he gave in, apologized, and promised her that he'd never wield that power. Following the appearance of the primeval gods... God. The universe that used to resolve around the giant snake and Manasa slowly began to disintegrate. I clearly chose an awful time to record because I'm now getting a bombardment of messages that I kind of need to pay attention to. I'm sure it'll be fine. I'm sure it'll be fine. My hobbies are more important to me than that. Most of the time. Regardless of how peace-oriented and fair-minded they might be, someone will always find something to complain about. And more started to break away from the giant snake's everlasting reign and hold hands with the inscrutable primeval gods. And the impact of their doings with the primeval gods having their backs were far more dire and complicated than any other matters that had been resolved thus far. In striving to tackle issues and get by the day, Manasa began to lose her composure and grew quieter over time. The giant snake offered to give his hand, but she refused his help, and just kept repeating, "Don't you ever wield that power." In the end, she reached the end of the road when the universe-devouring monster showed up. Oh, it's a Taraka. This monster was planned from a very distant past. And to find its cause, you'd have to go back eons of time and roam around. The more power she used, the darker her facial expression, and the shadier her aura became, and her tone became rather snippy. And by the time she finally succeeded in ridding the monster, her own body started to get engulfed by dark matter and collapse. Not even recognizing the giant snake, mindlessly roaring at the universe, she'd been defending with all of her. Manasa turned into something more catastrophic than the very monster she'd killed. The whole world cried out for the god's salvation, and they got crushed and annihilated. And in response, gods joined forces and managed to subdue her. But it was only temporary. They failed to keep her under control. And destruction's choice of remedy was the end of of existence. Having received the most potent and worst curse, Manasa shattered into pieces both physically and emotionally. The giant snake was in such a state that he couldn't even think of holding on to her body, and barely struggled to get a hold of her soul. Only to grab a piece that was left of her torn apart soul. That was her cost for sacrificing all of her for the sake of this universe. Please save her. He pleaded, but destruction had already turned his back on him, and creation remained silent. As for resurrection, he finally spoke after reading the rune between the other two. He said he could resurrect a piece of Manasa's soul into a different living entity, but for him to bear in mind that, since it's only a piece of her torn apart soul, the entity could be someone that's nothing like the Manasa he knew. Requested by the giant snake to bring her back to life, he gathered as much of Manasa's scattered name as possible. But it wasn't enough. But it wasn't sufficient enough to be Anastika, and had to be combined with another defective name to be regenerated into a whole name. But the biggest issue was that this regenerated name wasn't suitable for Manasa's torn apart soul. Having no other option left, he gave another reserved name to Manasa's soul, and the regenerated name to yet another soul. And finally, with the help of creation, he gave rise to two different living entities. The first was called Manasvin. He had partial power of Manasa's name and evoked a similar vibe to her. But his soul, looks, and even physique had no resemblance to Manasa. The second one was called Sagara. She held partial soul of Manasa, with a similar appearance, but both her power and personality were far from that of Manasa. Yes, they are. That's why I love her. He pleaded to have her resurrected out of desperation, but facing these two entities that became someone totally different, he just couldn't accept reality as is. And wanted to get his beloved companion back by going back to the time before the whole incident. Although his companion wanted so much for him not to use the power of time, she was no longer in the world. If only he could get her back, he was willing to use that prohibited power. If it cannot be used even at times like this power has no value to its existence. But when he returned to the time before the incident, Manasvin and Sagara were taking what should have been Manasa's place. And even when he went back further and further, so much farther back, until he reached the beginning of the universe, things were the same. Ananta, you look lost in thought again.
So listen to this. Kinara got kicked to the curb by Vitra. So much for a king couple. So right.
Oh shit, that's just after the previous one, Lamau. As if that was how things were from the beginning. As if the companion he remembers never even existed. This is why she told you not to use that power, Ananta. Having buried his memories that became a mere delusion, the giant snake had to restart his journey through 10 billion years of universe from the very beginning. And the damage that needed to be undone, because obviously there's no Manasa this time, the only one that can go about. I've just had a really fucked up realization. So, hear me out. Manasa had the power of time that we know Ananta has, and it slowly destroyed her. Then she was killed, and then her soul was split into, two new beings were made from her soul. Okay, right? And then Ananta went back and had, Manasa's power. Look at the present day. Ananta's dead. And we know of at least 2 characters that have Ananta's name. Right? Just saying. Time isn't a straight line, it's a circle. Look, yeah, maybe I'm tripping. Maybe I'm tripping. In the universe that started spinning all over again, primeval gods existed from the beginning. The giant snake went up to them, asking for an explanation. But destruction and creation didn't even understand where it was coming from. What in the world are you talking about? Manasvin and Sagara came into being just a while ago. Created by me and given their names by Vishnu. What are you rambling on about? You were right there when all of this took place. I notice how the hooded one isn't there. Probably Kali. Had all 3 primeval gods reacted the same way, the giant snake might have thought it was him losing it. But one of them, the primeval god of resurrection, seemed to have a different grasp on what he was saying. Sounds like the error of cause and effect has been fixed. As a result of your aggression to the past, while your wife had been replaced with Manasvin and Sagara after getting hit by the end of existence, the history was written in order to erase the error. And to make all Manasvins and Sagaras before the end of existence have nothing to do with your wife. In the end, Brahma creating them and me naming them became the only truth. Whereas the whole creation process you've witnessed became your delusion. That's no longer true in this universe. And Ananta learned to hate. Season 3, spin-off 18, In My Delusion, Volume 2. Using the power of time is like that. I'm sure your wife must have rewound time and must have rewound time and rewritten history countless times in the universe that you remember. But all you know is that she tried hard to do something, and nothing about how history has been changing. That's only natural, since all histories before each change would have turned into her delusions. You must have lived all your life believing the history replaced by her to be the only truth. But the history before that might have been completely different from the one in your memory. Maybe your wife wasn't a good leader for all we know. She could have done all sorts of bad things and just rewound time to make them all go away. How could you? She could have never done something like that! That's true only according to your data. The Sagara in this world would never imagine that you negated her and turned back 10 billion years. Of course, all this is my speculation. If you look at it in a good way, your wife could have been good for real. I'm telling you all this to make you aware of how dangerous time is. In the worst case scenario, someone could wreak havoc in the universe, and then erase all records of their wrongdoings by using time. You don't have to teach him everything like that. I'll have to clean up the mess if he really decides to go rogue. None of this would have happened if you didn't use your end of existence. Did I just get criticized for something that's happened 10 billion years from now? But actually hasn't happened 10 billion years from now. Happened 10 billion years from now in an alternate timeline that doesn't exist anymore. So that's even more absurd. You are getting blamed for something that would have happened 10 billion years in the future if it hadn't happened 10 billion years in the future. Which is, yeah, just smack Brahma. Just give her a smack around the face. Wait, I'm sure there was a good reason for unleashing the end of existence. Maybe things had reached the point of no return. Then why not just destroy this universe instead of going through the hassle? Maybe it was an attempt to restart this universe by changing the time axis? I mean, according to him, we show up very late in that universe. Then it couldn't have been a stable universe.
Perhaps it was an experiment to find the living creatures most suitable to become the time axis.
Living creature, not creatures.
Before starting this universe.
10 billion years just for an experiment. That's sick. First thing on my agenda once this universe ends and I regain my memories is to kill the mastermind behind such lunacy. It must be one of you two, needless to say.
Anyway, you did well rewinding the time. It's weird seeing Vishnu's eyes. Like, it's so strange seeing, like, eyebrows. Normally it's got, like, the hentai protagonist hair.
According to your story, the time axis of this universe must have been your wife. But unfortunately, a world without the time axis is destined to come to an end. So, by turning the time back and becoming the new time axis, you've given the universe a second chance. Take good care of it, and it might even be possible to behold the future after 10 billion years that your wife couldn't.
Though the giant snake had so much to say, he stepped back and retreated from there, and instead went to see resurrection when he was all by himself.
Wasn't all this part of your plan?
Hmm?
It was you who taught me the power of time. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have been able to turn back in time.
And what makes you so sure that was me?
Because
the giant snake tried to recall what happened that day, but the only recollection of that someone who taught him about the time was the image of them wearing a hood covering the whole face. And what's more, he couldn't even figure out why he assumed that someone was a primeval god.
There are a total of 4 primeval gods. Yeah, you have yet to meet her, but there's one more primeval god whose jurisdiction is chaos. She's in another universe for the time being. But with us active in this one, it won't be long before she shows up here and takes action to make this universe fall.
She already has, motherfucker. She already has.
All sorts of issues will likely arise far sooner than they did in the universe you remember. And to prevent them, you'll have to rewind the time countlessly. But I must warn you, the power of time isn't infinite. If you overuse it, you'll end up facing the same fate as your wife. So be wise and use it selectively. Only when you absolutely must. For how long this universe will hold out solely depends on you.
why me? Why leave that in my hands?
I don't have what it takes to carry out such great
Oh wait, no, this is Ananta still.
I don't have what it takes to carry out such a great responsibility. My choice to turn back time 10 billion years might have resulted in saving this universe. But the truth is, all I was trying to do was get my wife back. There has to be another one who's genuinely concerned for the good of this universe.
Wrong. No living creature cares about this universe, per se. Regardless of what one might say, everyone's got a different motivation that makes them work for this universe. Including other primeval gods and myself.
I've lost my beloved companion. I might not even have any motivation at all. It never occurred to you that I might just give up on the universe with no will to go on?
No. I know you couldn't do that. After all, this universe is something your beloved companion tried to defend with her all. Now that you've erased all her efforts from history, shouldn't you at least try to make a better world in the end? That'll be the only way you can atone for what you've done to her.
I hate the fact that he's not wrong. I really, really do. In the universe that started spinning again, lots of things were different, beside the fact that the primeval gods existed from the beginning. That is a pretty hefty difference, and is probably one of the major causes for things being so different. Also, the lack of another being on the level of Ananta. You know, there's not two beings with that level of power. So there's less supreme authority coming from on high, you know what I mean? Not knowing whether the reason for these differences was the active presence of the primeval gods, or because the universe he remembered was false,
and the current one was the real one. The giant snake was in a state of deep confusion, and started passing more and more time lost in the past, which now became his delusion. In his head, he understood that Manasvin and Sagara in this world had nothing to do with his wife. But in his delusion, that wasn't true. He did try to make believe with a smile when dealing with them, but it didn't take long until suffocating heaviness weighed down on him. The guilty feeling towards something that's no longer even real, toward the delusion that now only sits in his memory. To him, seeing the smiley faces of his clanmates that don't know anything was a trigger point that reminded him of the painful past. He started feeling increasingly out of place around his clanmates, to the point that he started avoiding them. And while he roamed about away from his clan, he developed a friendship with a few he clicked with. We got Iravada and Yaksha. Oddly enough, the odd ones out of all Nastika, really. Among them were two that he became particularly close with. One was Iravata. She was a Nastika who lived for 10 billion years in his delusion, but got killed when the universe-devouring monster appeared. The other one was Yaksha. He was a Nastika who died almost at the beginning of his delusion. In light of the universe in his delusion, what could be done to make the current universe a better one? It was only logical to be concerned with the one who was soon to die, rather than the one who was to survive for another 10 billion years. Don't tag along all the time. I need some quality time with my wife in private, you know? The giant snake knew that Yaksha went berserk and died early in the universe in his delusion. But he didn't know how things got to that point. If Manasa could turn back the time, why didn't she try to save him? What should I do if the same thing were to happen in this universe? While he was still struggling to decide whether to follow Manasa's decision in his delusion, the incident that was the start of the tragedy occurred. Interesting. Very interesting. So, what we saw previously, I can't remember which one it was. What was it called? Fuck, I don't remember. But, you know, we all know. Oh, Red Fox and the Black Bear, obviously. Duh. Right. What we saw was the history that Ananta most likely brought about. I assume we're going to see what happened originally. Hanuman couldn't care less about the king's wife dying, but he didn't want the fox to get into trouble while trying to prevent disaster. So he alerted the king, who then immediately rushed to the scene and slew all the Sira that were present, including the fox. Well, this universe, this is very different, very, very different to how things went last time. What the hell? Having witnessed bits and pieces of his wife's remains, the king had lost the ability to distinguish friends from foes. King of the land. Because the king's been suppressing his hostility since the beginning of time, no one even knew he possessed such a unique transcendental skill until the moment he unleashed it. This skill, which brings all terrestrial animals to their knees once triggered by the king's rage, has rendered legions of humans and Sura incapable of running, fighting back for their lives, ultimately leading them to their deaths. While kings of other clans were wary of this unknown transcendental and reluctant to go near him, the giant snake took it upon himself to approach him and subdue his rage. However, unable to forgive himself for what he'd done, Yaksha ended his own life. Season 3, spin-off 18, In My Delusion, Volume 3. After learning that his wife's tragic death was why the king had gone berserk, the giant snake went back in time and attempted to stop this death. But no matter how he twisted the incident, his wife died. Just like how Yaksha does still die in the history that we know, and so does Arivata. They both still end up dead, regardless of Ananta's triflings. They just end up dead later. If not by the same bastards, then by some others. If not at that time, then some other. If not at that place, then somewhere else. And the justification for her assassination was a refusal to bear the king's offspring. But since Rakshasa were non-existent in the universe in his delusion, they must have had some other reason for killing her back then. But at least in the current universe, Rakshasa were created by the primeval gods, thus giving validity to this justification. What? That seems what? That doesn't make sense. Rakshasa were created by the primeval gods, but then how does that justify her refusing to bear the king's offspring? What? I'm a touch confused as to what that means. So the giant snake decided to go back to an earlier time frame and persuade the couple to please do him a favor, as the matter could lead to the fighting within the clan. God, I've got a frog in my throat. And to participate in the reproduction process, as other clan kings do. Then, how come you're not taking part in that reproduction you speak of? That's because I still haven't found a partner. Yeah, I understand. I feel the same. I don't think my heart will move unless it's my loving wife. Darling, what do you think about my friends pleading? Alright, it's a shame I won't be able to help the humans in the meantime. But if not having a child is that grave of an issue. The couple agreed to do as the giant snake asked, without much pushback. And this seemed to have solved the problem. But that proved to be wrong. Jambavana was still attacked after she conceived the king's baby. To make things worse, her bodyguards attacked her, the seemingly most loyal clanmates. As changing into Asura form would kill the baby, she tried to escape the attack in her human form, but in the end she died before reaching the king. Losing both his beloved wife and child when he was passionately in love with them was enough to trigger the king's wrath. It was nothing like the rage the giant snake had seen in previous times. And as a result, his transcendental king of the land was almost that much more powerful. Its power was mighty enough to bring down the giant snake, the strongest in the universe, to a comparable level. And in that critical moment, when the giant snake hesitated to kill his friend, the king attacked him, inflicting an injury fatal enough. The giant snake died. Or so he thought. But the next thing he knew, he was back at the beginning of time. The primeval god called it a survival instinct, that his strong will to survive had rewound time. They also told him to either rewind the time before his life gets threatened, or fight back earnestly, if he wanted to avoid getting dragged back to the beginning of time. Was my survival instinct really that strong? Not so convinced, the giant snake asked himself. But at that point, he had no choice but to accept the information supplied by the primeval gods. After discussing what had happened, the primeval gods pointed at the fox as the cause. That's not fair on Shuri. The fox's bewitching ability was so intense that even the primeval gods would dispute whether to consider it an error. On top of turning people into her followers that idolize her, the said skill would also transfer the fox's innermost desires to those followers. Everyone has one of those dark desires buried deep in their minds. Something you craved for but didn't dare reach out for. Normally, one would keep that desire to themselves and just live on. But the fox would unknowingly transfer it to her followers. As a result, she can fulfill her needs without making any moves or getting blamed for the consequences. Although the end might not be the form she had hoped for, in the end, the king, his wife, and the fox weren't meant to coexist. The giant snake was forced to give up on one of them. The difference between now and your delusion is that, in this universe, we're present. There's also a place called Paradise. Unlike in the universe in your delusion, where Nastika were all destined to return to nothingness upon death. Here, they have the option to either reach enlightenment or enter Paradise. Although I might add, both are extremely difficult to achieve for a Nastika.
Jamavana is more than qualified to be welcomed to Paradise.
For this very reason, the primeval god suggested giving up on the king's wife. The giant snake shared the whole story with her. Even though he couldn't tell her everything as is, the wise Jamavana could read between the lines and understood the whole picture. And then, without the slightest hint of resentment or sorrow, she gave the giant snake a gentle pat on the shoulder and said, "It's okay. You've done more than enough. It must have been so hard on you." Death was guarding the gates to Paradise. Death, who was guarding the gates of Paradise, was touched deeply to see the very first Nastika who made it there, and granted her last wish. The king, after having the last dream made out of her last wish, finally managed not to go berserk and accepted his wife's death. Nonetheless, he always seemed to be standing on the edge of a cliff. The giant snake, knowing too well the feelings of emptiness and loneliness that follow the loss of a loved one, tried even harder to be his good friend. And soon after, someone who could take his worries away appeared. Ran. Someone who came from the future. A human who has the king's heart. The king slowly stabilized through interactions with this human, and regained a purpose in life, envisioning a future he hopes for. A myriad of things has happened since then, of which the giant snake prevented some of them, but not others. Yet he put his trust in those he'd saved, and overcame obstacles in life with their help, firmly believing that all his endeavors to make a difference were in fact worthwhile. And one day, after billions of years later, the giant snake heard the news of his old friend's passing on the suburban planet. He would have never lost the fight had he been in his normal state, but unfortunately, he lent his heart to a human who suffered from heart disease, and withholding the retrieval of his heart eventually led to his death. This makes no sense. His friend has been holding out, looking forward to a future encounter he longed for. There's no way he'd give up on his life like this, but it's an encounter he cannot have as long as he has his heart. The giant snake went back to a time before he died, but he seemed to have already risen above his future death he was already aware of. According to him, the primeval gods had informed him that his lent heart will, after his death, go around among different people until it finally ends up inside that human's body from the future. Then he said if he retrieved his heart now or survived his death, his friendship with that human would be regarded as an error and get erased. That the person who's been there to keep him company and support him through billions of years would vanish as if he never even existed. If so, I choose to give up on the future encounter. and hold on to the friendship I've built over the years. My friend gave up his remaining life to save the existence of someone who's given him the emotional support he needed throughout the years. And at the sight of his death, the snake saw different gods picking up his friend's remains. The primeval god standing behind them with a smile. Ah, Ananta! Don't take it too hard. It needed to be done for the sake of this universe. No matter how hard you search, you won't find a better option than this one. All those lives he saved, believing it was the right thing to do. All the choices he made, believing that they were better than the ones in the universe in his delusions. Billions of years of blood, sweat, and tears were all in the palm of that one god's hand. The giant snake barely had any recollection of what happened next. First, the god in front of him, then the earth, the sky, and countless stars in the universe have all faded away from his eyes. Let me perish with this universe that's nothing more than a toy for gods. Just let me die. His survival instinct had a mind of its own.
Ananta, what's wrong?
The giant snake broke into tears because he knew the ending too well. Because he knew there was no other way around it. Because he couldn't even give up on everything and run away. Spin-off 18 in my delusion, end. That's fucking dark. That's so rough. I feel so bad for Ananta, man. He just wanted to be happy, to do the right thing, and that's... Poor guy, man. That's so cruel! Well, with that out of the way, I've been Animosity, you've been you. Leave a like, comment, sub, notification bell, share the video around, and I hope the new year treats you well. Ta-ta for now.